Since the dawn of the automobile, one question has fueled endless debate. Which nation builds the greatest cars? Ask any car fanatic and two countries will always be among the top. Japan and Germany. The land of relentless innovation versus the home of precision engineering. For years, fans dreamed of a showdown. BMW versus Nissan, Audi versus Honda, Mercedes versus Lexus. And in the late 2010s, that dream came closer than ever. After a decade of talks and painstaking rulemaking, Germany's DTM and Japan's Super GT stood ready to launch a joint racing category, the Champions League of touring car racing. The foundation was excellent, the framework was set, but it never happened. Years of effort fizzled into a handful of show races, nothing more. The dream of the ultimate touring car championship was gone. But what went wrong? How could such an awesome project fail? And is there still hope for the dream class of touring car racing to return? To fully understand how Japan's Super GT and Germany's DTM nearly joined forces, we need to take a quick look at their histories. Because both categories shared striking similarities and issues, but in the end, they were literally still worlds apart. Super GT officially launched in 2005, evolving from the Japanese Grand Touring Championship. Over the years, the JGTC went from Group C prototypes and Group A touring cars to GT1 and GT2 machines before settling into its signature and iconic GT500 and GT300 classes in the late 90s, mostly to save costs. But this final rule change actually set the foundation of today's Super GT series, as the GT500 and GT300 classes remain alive until today. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, another iconic touring car series was in full swing. DTM, officially launched in 1984, began as a straightforward Group A touring car championship, but by the late 90s it had evolved into a high-tech prototype-style touring car category that nobody could afford to run anymore, leading to the series basically collapsing under its own weight in 1996. After being extinct for 3 years, DTM made its comeback in the year of 2000, as Germany's car manufacturers could agree on a common ground in terms of costs and rule framework. Because the popularity and passion never faded, just like in Japan with Super GT. So, through the early 2000s, both series carried on in their own worlds, delivering some of the most spectacular racing you could imagine. However, spectacular cars and thrilling races almost always come with a price. And by price, I literally mean monetary costs. DTM in particular never learned this lesson. Letting manufacturers engage in an unrestricted development war never ends well. After the series lost Opel in 2005, making DTM a two-make series only, the promoters knew that things had to change. So, in 2010, the governing body of Super GT announced that negotiations with DTM have started in order to streamline regulations and car specs. The initial vision was simple. Teams should be able to race Super GT cars in DTM and DTM cars in Super GT, giving manufacturers a bigger stage for their machines and a better reason to justify the high development costs. From a marketing standpoint, a joint approach made perfect sense as well. Both series showcased their nation's mass-produced road cars, and both markets, Japan and Germany, were always highly lucrative markets. But there was a catch. Despite their similarities in vision, the two championships still had some major differences to overcome. These differences were mainly based on three things: the technical specifications of the cars, the racing regulations, and also some cultural approaches. In contrast to DTM, Super GT was a two-class racing series to begin with. However, the GT300 class could be left out of the equation, as it was made up mostly by standard GT3 cars. Nevertheless, a new technical framework had to be negotiated to align the GT500 class with DTM silhouette touring cars. While the GT500 class was historically rather unrestricted, featuring entries of turbocharged as well as naturally aspirated machines, DTM cars were strictly featuring 4-liter V8 engines. At the same time, Super GT featured multiple tire manufacturers, whereas DTM stuck with a single tire supplier. On top of that, the racing format was different as well. While DTM focused on classic sprint races, Super GT featured semi-endurance events, typically around 300 kilometers, with some special races stretching up to 450 kilometers. The differences in race length obviously had high implications on the technical specifications of the streamlined cars. Nevertheless, Super GT and DTM signed a cooperation agreement in 2012 to develop a framework that would make the dream touring car, aka Class One, a reality. While the newly formed relationship looked promising from the outside, progress in finding real common ground was moving slowly. Both parties managed to implement a standardized monocoque in 2014, a starting point, at least. Over the years, more parts were standardized in both series, such as the crash structures or the gearbox, but actual progress in attempting to make cars equal so they could race against each other was not really moving forward. To give a better example, Class 1 cars were set to use 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo engines. Super GT made the switch instantly in 2014, but DTM stuck with their V8s until 2019. Why? Well, that's a good question. After BMW rejoined the series in 2012, DTM was on a peak. Great racing, strong fan interest, and no urgent reason to change, at least at the surface. But by the late 2010s, DTM was struggling again. When Mercedes pulled out in 2018, the series suddenly had to pin its hopes on the success of the Class 1 car to keep manufacturers on board. DTM finally introduced the new engines in 2019, but that was still 5 years behind Super GT. Nevertheless, with the new engines in DTM and standardized floors and wings among both series, we finally saw a joint race in 2019, the so-called Dream Race in Fuji, Japan. It was a show event made up of 2 races, but for the first time, Germany's and Japan's top touring cars went head-to-head. And even as a show, the on-track battles were great, offering a glimpse of the huge potential this collaboration actually holds. Another event took place at Germany's Hockenheim Ring, and to the outside world, everything looked promising. Would we finally see DTM and Super GT cars competing in each other's home series around the globe? If you followed any of those series, you probably know how it ends. It never happened. Audi pulled the plug on their DTM program in 2020, pushing the series toward collapse. With only one manufacturer left, Japanese teams had no reason to jump into a European series. BMW could have entered Super GT, but would it have made sense with no home series? And that's basically where the story ends. Nearly a decade of talks and negotiations, only to lead to nothing. You could start the blame game here. And honestly, Super GT was always quick to adopt the new rules, while DTM took far too long. But in my opinion, both parties treated this project as what they call it, as just a dream. If this project was truly a priority, they would have fought harder for it. The process dragged on way too long. Sure, negotiations are tough and both parties have their reasons, but if you really want something to happen, it shouldn't take a decade. There never was real pressure to get it done, only when it was already too late. Today, Super GT still runs the Class 1 cars, but nowhere else in the world do you see them. Meanwhile, DTM has switched to GT3 machinery. It is sad to see Class 1 fade away like this. It had the potential to create a true spectacle, not just in Super GT and DTM, but even IMSA in the US showed interest in joining, aiming to form a real touring car Champions League during the winter break. But once again, it all just stayed a dream. What do you think about the Class 1 project? Do you think it had potential? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching and see you next time.